This is Harbor Me by Jacqueline Woodson. Chapter 1. We think they took my puppy. It's over now, or maybe it isn't. Maybe, even as I sit on my bed in the dying light of the late afternoon, it's beginning again. Maybe Mrs. Laverne is looking over the new class list, her finger moving down the row of names. Maybe her, she is thinking, and him, and her. But it won't be the same. It won't ever be the six of us together again. We think they took my puppy. My uncle is a musician and a storyteller. He says the hardest part of telling a story is finding the beginning. I've pulled the voice recorder from my closet and have it sitting on the middle of my bed now. When I press play, Esteban's voice fills my room. It is scratchy and far away sounding, but still, Esteban is here again, and all of us are sitting in our small circle in a place we called the art room. Nobody knows where he's at. Outside, a blue jay perches on the edge of a branch. A lenthus tree of heaven. Miss Laverne taught us that. It's the same tree the girl in A Tree Grows in Brooklyn saw from her fire escape. The thing about that tree was it could grow anywhere and keep growing, and that was the metaphor. That even when things got really hard for everyone in that story, even when the dad died and the mom had to scrub more and more floors to make money, even when the kids didn't have anything to eat for days and the apartment was freezing, the tree kept growing. The main character, her name was Francie. She was like that tree. Miss Laverne said that all of us, Esteban, Tiago, Holly, Amari, Ashton, and even me, were like that tree too. My uncle is moving out tomorrow. He's really the only parent I've ever known. He says, "This is a beginning," he says. "Now you'll have 2 houses to go to," he says. "You're 12 now, Haley, you're ready." But I'm not ready. This afternoon, I miss everything. I miss my uncle, even though he's upstairs packing. I miss the art room. I miss Holly and Amari arguing and Ashton pushing his hair away from his forehead. This afternoon, I miss Tiago's dreams of the sea and Esteban's poems and all the stories we finally trusted each other enough to tell. I miss the beginning of our story together and the deep middle of it. Once, there were 6 of us. Once we circled around each other and listened, or maybe what matters most is that we were heard. Downstairs, my father is playing the piano, soft, sad notes floating up from the living room. The piano is old, found on the street a few blocks away the day my father moved back home. My father, uncle, and 3 other men lifted it up the stairs, then had to remove the door to get it inside. It's an upright, scratched wood and yellowing keys. My father took a whole day tuning it, and now the notes move through the house, dipping down at the end like tears, rising up like prayer. Upstairs, I can hear my uncle moving from dresser to bed and back again, and I know he is neatly folding shirts and sweaters into his suitcase. Most of his stuff is already downstairs. Boxes line the hall by the front door. His favorite chair is draped with a blanket. His guitars are stacked in their cases beside it. Tomorrow, he will move to Manhattan and start his new life. "I'll be the bachelor I was always meant to be," he said. Then, seeing the look on my face I failed at hiding, he added, "And I'll be back every single Sunday to spend time with my most favorite person in the world." I don't remember a life without my uncle in it. In 2 weeks, I'll begin 7th grade. My best friend Holly will be there, and there will be holes where Ashton, Amari, Tiago, and Esteban once were. We think they took my puppy. I played the first words of Esteban's story over and over as my father's song lifts up to my room, as my uncle packs above me, as the blue jay perches in the ailanthus tree, as the world keeps on spinning. Chapter 2. That first week of September, the rain wouldn't stop. Rivers ran down along the curbs, and at the corner near our school, cars had stalled in the middle of the huge pools of rainwater. Even though it was still warm outside, our classroom felt damp and a little bit cold. Some of the kids were playing with those spinner things. One boy, whose name I forget, had his head down on his desk. I remember his dark curls, the way they fell over his arm. For some reason, those curls spiraling over his arm and down onto the scratched-up desk made me sadder than anything. There were 8 of us then. Our small class had come together because the school wanted to try something new. Could they put 8 kids together in a room with 1 teacher and make something amazing? 8 special kids. Even though they didn't say it, we knew there was something different about us. We had all been in the big classrooms before, and our learning felt like a race we were losing, while the other kids sped ahead. We made believe we didn't care what we learned differently, but we knew we did, and the school knew we did. The school knew we got laughed at and teased in the big yard, and that some days we faked stomach aches and sore throats to stay home. It was only September, so no one knew if this experiment would work, but our teacher, Miss Laverne, was tall and soft-spoken and patient. We loved her immediately, and the school itself had huge windows and brightly colored walls. My uncle said it was one of the best schools in the city. I had been there with Holly since first grade, so I didn't really have any other schools to compare it to. But if nice teachers and rooms filled with lots of windows made something the best, then I guess it was true. By the end of that rainy week, the boy with the curls had moved away, and another girl's mom had come in and fussed about her daughter being smarter than those kids, while Miss Laverne shushed her and guided her and her daughter gently out of the room. The girl looked like she wanted to sink into the floor and disappear. We never saw her again, but sometimes I wonder what it would have been like if she had gotten a chance to be a part of the art room, if she'd gotten to hear what we heard, see what we saw. After she and the curly-haired boy left, only Miss Laverne and the 6 of us remained. An hour after class started on that Friday, Esteban came in, his head down, his hair slicked wet against his forehead, his Yankees cap dripping with rain. He walked straight to his seat without looking at the rest of us. I watched him sink into a seat so sadly and heavily it felt like the whole room shivered. His jacket was way too big for him, and the shoulders hanging down his arms, the sleeves falling over his hands. I didn't know Esteban yet. I didn't know anyone but Holly, really. But I wanted to go over to him, hug him hard. I didn't care how dripping wet he was. No one should ever have to look that sad. "Do you have a late pass for me, Esteban?" Miss Laverne asked. She was standing at the front of the room, her arms stretched out towards the smartboard. I don't remember what was on it, maybe a globe. Our tiny group that year was a 5th, 6th grade class. This, too, was a school experiment. "Is everything okay?" Miss Laverne's dark brown face was crisscrossed with worry. Esteban shook his head. "I don't have a pass," he said, his voice breaking. "We think they took my puppy. Nobody knows where he's at." He put his head down on his desk, his face turned towards the window. Miss Laverne went over to Esteban's desk and bent towards him, her hand on his back. They spoke softly to each other. Maybe they spoke for 5 minutes. Maybe it was an hour, I don't remember. That was a long time ago. So much can change in a minute, an hour, a year. Chapter 3. While Miss Laverne talked to Esteban about his father that morning, I thought about mine. I thought about handcuffs. I thought about fathers being taken away. I thought about uncles coming to the rescue and mothers gone. The memory is mostly shadows now. My father's pale hands hanging from silver handcuffs. The cops pushing his head down into the police car. My uncle coming to me and lifting me up into his arms. I was 3 years old. When my uncle first came to live with me, I was afraid. It was this vague fear around the edges of myself. Whenever I got real quiet in class, Miss Laverne knew why. As I watched Esteban that morning, I felt it. The fear coming around the corner, finding me, finding both of us. I stared over at him. I wanted to give Esteban the same sign, my pinky pointing towards him while my thumb pointed towards me. I wanted to say, "I know that thing, Esteban. I've looked out the window that same way." Miss Laverne turned from Esteban and told us to read quietly to ourselves. We took our books from our bag and opened them, but I don't know if any of us read a single word. The whole world felt wide open suddenly, like it wanted to swallow us. I heard him tell Miss Laverne, "I'm scared. I'm so scared." When the lunch bell rang, Esteban stayed behind. I wanted to touch his shoulder as I walked out and say, "It won't always feel like the first day. It won't always feel this bad," but I didn't. I let the words hang in my throat until Holly grabbed my hand and pulled me down the hall with her. Behind us, I heard Amari say, "E, what's going on? Tell me, bro." Chapter 4. If there's one thing I do remember as clear as if it happened an hour ago, it's the afternoon when Miss Laverne said to us, "Put down your pencils and come with me." It was the end of September, and we had been taking a spelling test. Esteban had been absent for days, and when he finally returned, Miss Laverne asked him if he was up to doing some work, and he nodded. "It helps me forget a little while," he said. "Forget what?" Amari asked. "That nobody knows where they took him, and now we're packing up everything," Esteban said, "because if they took him, maybe they're going to take us too." I turned back to my test. I didn't want to think about fathers. Mine had been in prison for 8 years by then. In the last letter we'd gotten, he said he wasn't sure what would happen with his parole. If he got it, he didn't know exactly when he'd be coming home. I remember zero about living with him. Every good thing that happened had happened with my uncle. I couldn't imagine a different life, didn't want to imagine it. Not for me, not for anyone. I was stuck on the word holiday. Did it have one L or two? My spelling had always been bad, but in Miss Laverne's class, it didn't matter so much because we were all at different levels in one thing or another. The words you miss just tell me what you don't know yet, Miss Laverne always says. It says nothing about who you are. For some reason, that made me feel better. I was 11 years old. What 11-year-old didn't know how to spell holiday? Put down your pencils and come with me. The 6 of us stood up. Our school uniforms were white shirts and dark blue pants and skirts. We could wear any jackets, shoes, and tights we wanted. I had worn blue and white striped tights that day. Holly's tights had red stars in them, and when we stood next to each other in the schoolyard that morning, our stars and striped echoed the flag waving from the pole above us. We had spent the minutes before the bell rang dancing around while Holly sang that old song about having a hammer. I'd hammer out danger, I'd hammer out a warning. We stood next to our desks and waited for Miss Laverne to tell us what to do next. Amari pulled his hoodie over his head, then quickly pulled it off again, the way he sometimes did when he was nervous. Amari was beautiful. His skin was so dark you could almost see the color blue running beneath it. His eyes were dark too, dark like there was smoke behind his pupils, dark and serious and infinite. In that 5th, 6th grade class, I didn't know how to say any of this. I wanted only to look at him and look at him. Take a picture, it lasts longer, Amari said to me in such a cranky way it almost brought me to tears. Ashton smirked, then pushed his hair away from his forehead and held on his hand there. She doesn't want a picture of you, Holly said. Bad enough we have to look at you 5 days a week. She had left her desk and was heading over to the classroom library. Holly, back to your desk, Miss Laverne said. I want you all to take your books. You won't be coming back here today. We had all gathered our stuff and followed her into the hallway. Miss Laverne took out her phone and said, Smile, people. In the photo, Holly and I have our fingers linked together, our tights looking crazier than ever. Amari has his hood halfway on and halfway off, and Tiago, Esteban, and Ashton are all looking away from the camera. The picture is taped to my refrigerator now. The camera. We all look so young in it, our cheeks puffing out with baby fat, our uniformed shirts untucked, Tiago's sneakers untied. We walked down the hall behind Miss Laverne, her heels softly clicking. I thought about how maybe one day I'd grow up to wear black shoes with small heels that clicked as I walked down a hall and have students following behind who were a little bit in love with me. 2 small kids came running down the hall, but when they saw Miss Laverne, they stopped and started walking so slowly I almost laughed. Esteban pulled his knapsack onto his shoulder and held it with both hands. You okay, bro? Amari put his hand on Esteban's arm. Nah, Esteban said, not really. Amari moved his arm over Esteban's shoulder and kept it there. Chapter 5. When we got to room 501, Miss Laverne opened the door and held it for us. Nobody knew what to do, so we just walked in and stood there. The room was bright and smelled like it had just been cleaned with the same oil soap my uncle uses on our floors. Back when me and Holly were in 3rd grade, it had been the art room, but then someone gave our school enough money to open up a whole art studio in the basement, so now this was just a room we passed by sometimes and said to each other, remember when that used to be the art room? Welcome to room 501, Miss Laverne said. Holly ran in ahead and the rest of us followed and looked around. In the old art room, there was just a few chairs with swing-up desks in a circle. A teacher's desk with no chair, a big clock on the wall, and some little kid's ancient painting of a bright yellow sun thumbtacked to the closet door. Esteban asked, Are we getting transferred to a new class? He put his knapsack down between his ankles and hugged himself. Amari had taken his arm off Esteban's shoulder, but was still standing close to him. When Esteban shivered, Amari put his arm back. I heard him whisper, It's all good, bro, it's all good. Miss Laverne's not taking us somewhere we don't want to be. Miss Laverne sat on the edge of the teacher's desk and folded her arms. Every Friday from now until the end of the school year, the 6 of you will leave my classroom at 2 p.m. and come into room 501. You'll sit in this circle and you'll talk. When the bell rings at 3, you're free to go home. Why can't we just talk in our regular classroom? Holly asked, hopping up onto the teacher's desk. In your classroom. Our regular classroom wasn't regular. We knew that, but still. Down from there, please, Holly. Miss Laverne waited for Holly to jump off again before she continued. I don't want to hear what you have to say to each other. This is your time, your world, your room. Sounds like you're trying to get an early break from us, Holly said. Give yourself your own kind of half day. Miss Laverne laughed. One day, Holly, your brain will be very useful to you. Holly looked like she wasn't sure if our teacher was complimenting her. What I'm trying to do is give you the space to talk about the things kids talk about when no grown-ups are around. Don't you all have a world you want to be in that doesn't have people who look like me in it? Nope, Amari said. Yeah, Ashton said, not really. We like being with you, I added. In the other room. You like what you know, Miss Laverne said. You like what's familiar. None of us said anything. She was right. What was wrong with liking familiar things? Nothing wrong with that, Miss Laverne said, being a teacher and mind reader, but what's unfamiliar shouldn't be scary, and it shouldn't be avoided either. But I don't know what we're even supposed to talk about, Tiago said, like schoolwork and stuff, and to who? Schoolwork, toys, TV shows, me, yourself, anything you want to talk about to each other, and it's to whom, Tiago? To whom? Tiago said to himself like he was practicing it. To whom? I think any other bunch of kids would have started happy dancing and acting crazy because they weren't going to be any grown-ups around, but we weren't any other kid. I heard Amari say, "That's stupid," so quietly that I wondered if I was hearing things, and then he said, "We could be talking in class if we wanted to be talking. You're trying to change the art room into the ARTT room, a room to talk." That's right, Ashton said. He and Amari pounded fists. I like that. Miss Laverne clapped once and pointed at Amari. You are brilliant. I could have come up with that, Holly rolled her eyes. I could have added an R and thrown an acronym out there, she said, acronym loudly, making sure Miss Laverne heard. Nice use of the word, Holly, Miss Laverne said. Okay, so because the art room is now the ARTT room, no one gets in trouble for talking here. You get in trouble for taking out your phone. You get in trouble for being disrespectful. How are you going to know if you're not in here with us? Amari asked her. I'll know. And we all knew she was telling the truth. Teachers knew things. That's all there was to it. Well, what if I don't have anything to say to anybody? Amari asked. Miss Laverne laughed again. Since when do you not have anything to say, Amari? She shook her head and waved her hand to include all of us. I can't believe you all are so resistant. I'm giving you an hour to chat. You get in trouble for this every single day. How many times do I have to say no talking? Now I'm saying talk. Amari tried to hide a smile, but he didn't do a great job of it. Okay, I'm vibing it. The old art room is the new art room, y'all. And I bet you can draw in here too if you want, Ashton said to him. Miss Laverne nodded. Draw? Talk? And yes, Amari, the art room is beyond clever. Like I said, anybody could have thought of that, Holly said. Yeah, but I see you didn't, Amari said. And like I said, Miss Laverne told us, in this room, we won't be unkind. She started it. Doesn't matter, Amari. I just want to get it straight, Ashton said. So school now ends at 2:00 on Fridays. He had pale white skin like my uncle and hair that always fell into his eyes. Even as he asked, he was holding it back with his hand. Once Holly had said to him, just cut it already, and his ears turned bright red. My own hair had always been bright red, but lately it had started getting darker and kinkier. If Holly's mother didn't braid it for me, I just pulled it back into a sloppy ponytail that frizzed all around my face. Jeez, Ashton, Holly said, that's not what she's saying. This is so not deep, people. I just don't really understand why we're going into another room, Ashton said, by ourselves. I think looking back on that day now, that's the line that will always stay with me. Another room, by ourselves. How many other rooms by ourselves have we walked into since that day, even if they weren't real rooms and we didn't know what we were doing? I stood there thinking about my father. In 6 months or a year, I didn't know exactly when, I'd be walking into another room, the one where my father lived with me. And as I stood there, Esteban was inside the room where he didn't know where his dad was. He glanced at me. That day, no one but Holly knew that my dad was in prison. I felt like I was betraying Esteban, like I should have been standing next to him saying, hey, it's going to be okay. But I couldn't. I couldn't tell the truth about my dad to help him. So I looked down at my skirt and thought about rooms. I wondered about Tiago, Holly, Amari, and Ashton. What were the rooms for them? What did they hide inside those rooms? Another room, I thought. We were always entering another room. That day, Miss Laverne pushed us out, from the familiar to the unfamiliar. It felt like an hour passed as she waited for us to say something. I looked at the clock. The second hand made an echoing sound, and when it ticked, it was 5 minutes past 2. 55 minutes left. You can do this, Ashton. You all can do this, Miss Laverne finally said. And with that, she walked away. With that, she let us go.